How about now? I think now it'll work. Let's wait for, just gonna check. Do. I think I know what's up. Maybe now it'll work. Let's see. How about now? Here we go. Okay, cool. So things are working now. That's my bad. So we're gonna restart this explanation, which is great because people just came in. That was my bad. I was monitoring the audio. So hi, welcome to the biology office hours. I've just been speaking in silence for 10 minutes. So what we're going to be covering today is basically any questions, anything you actually want to get covered. And I have 3 main topics I want to cover that are from the Instagram comments section, or I guess the questions, whatever. And it's going to be punctuated equilibrium, a really cool model of evolution. We're going to talk about the debate around the selfish gene. And for that one in particular, I'm actually I realized I really want to make a good video on the selfish gene, so I'm not going to go crazy in depth because I think it needs a lot of nuance, but we're also going to just talk about some general conservation biology, making this a career advice. So, let's get back into punctuated equilibrium. This is great, I already have the example started. So let's just simplify this to make this a little easier. So let's say punctuated equilibrium, here we go, is essentially an evolutionary theory that says that evolutionary changes occur rapidly in very, very short periods of time versus a more gradual model that we are pretty used to. And so yeah, in referencing Wildlife Brothers, yeah, the selfish gene is going to be part of the Dawkins book. So we'll definitely cover that. But so with punctuated equilibrium stuff, let's say we have a population of snails underneath a gradual model of evolution. And I know I only have 4 snails here, but imagine that the population is actually quite large. So with each generation underneath a gradual form of evolution, these snails wouldn't change very rapidly. You know, from generation to generation, they are going to appear to be quite similar. And that's just largely because they might have a large population size. If there are thousands of individuals in a population, and you are, for example, a different snail, you have some trait that is different than the normal, than the standard, the wild type, the holotype, then you're most likely not going to be passing on genetic information into the next generation. And that's just because you're swamped out by thousands of other individuals. Even if your trait may be very beneficial, right? It doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to be passed on to the next generation. So you have maybe a 1% chance of passing that information on to the next one just because there's so many. But let's give a different example, okay? Let's give a different example. Let's say instead you have this large population, but what happens, come on. What happens is just a few individuals get separated, okay? Let's say they actually just get separated by this, by a river that flows through, okay? So a river comes through and these snails are really bad at swimming for whatever reason, so now they are more isolated. What happens in populations is that the larger a population, the less likely they are to be influenced by random processes. And then inversely, the smaller a population, the more likely they are to be influenced by random processes. This is actually genetic drift. So if we have some type of an example here, where there is a large population, right? We talked about there's a blue snail there, and it's such a small proportion of the population. Just to make this example even more clear, we're just gonna copy and paste a few of these snails. So if it is just one blue snail in a large population, it's just a little bit more unlikely that it will pass on its genetic information. But let's say instead, that's not correct. I think this app is a little bit slow. That's a little weird. So let's say instead that we have this blue snail in a much smaller population. Well, now it is more likely to pass on its genetic material. Instead of being swamped out by dozens and hundreds and maybe even thousands of other individuals with this green color, maybe there's only a few. And drift may take over, and now all of a sudden, these populations of snails going on to the next generation, so let's say generation 2, now it's more likely that the blue coloration may be passed on. Okay, and so bear with me on this. This is just going to be a good explanation for what punctuated equilibrium looks like. So now what we're seeing is a larger shift. We're seeing a shift in the population that appears to be dramatic, okay? Let's say over time, this population, this new generation that is blue snails instead of green snails, they're wildly different. They look completely different than the past generations. They may actually rejoin the ancestral populations. Of course, they're not the exact same individuals, time has passed, but they are now in the same range. What happens is that in our understanding of evolution is that it appears, and for good reason, that these snails have evolved quickly, okay? But what really has happened is that it's a small population that has undergone changes due to drift. It doesn't have to be a small population, this is just one example. So how can we actually see punctuated equilibrium? We can look at it in the fossil record. Let's say that in the fossils you're actually able to tell if these snails are green or blue. Okay, let's just say we can do that. You're going through and you're looking at historical snail populations. Often in discussions about punctuated equilibrium, they refer to the fossil record. Let's say you take a cross-section of a mountain. You're walking through and you see this wonderful, wonderful layers of stone that each contain fossils. This is one of the beautiful examples of evolution because the way that most of the time things work is that sedimentation deposits on top of each other. So what we can see is that the layers at the bottom are older than the layers at the top, which are newer. So under a gradual model of evolution, if we have our green and blue snails, let's say we start with our green snails, right? We start with our green snails. Underneath that gradual model of evolution, what we would see, I gotta pause, it actually has a little lag, this is so peculiar. We would see that maybe the evolutionary pathway is eventually going towards blue, but we just don't really see those changes in that fossil record. This is a gradual model again, so maybe at some point in time we actually do have a blue snail that appears, and maybe in the next generation we see a little bit more blue snails that are swamped out from the green snails. So, let's see. So, just to be clear, just to reiterate, this would be what gradual evolution would look like in the fossil record. Okay, we start with just green snails. And with each generation, we have progressively a little bit more blue. You can also do this with the shell morphology itself. Maybe they are perfectly round shells, and then they sort of elongate over time into more of a cone snail type of look. That you would be able to see in the fossil record, and in fact we do in many species. It's sort of it's a misconception that we don't see gradual evolution in the fossil record. We absolutely do. Underneath a punctuated equilibrium model, instead of this gradual, where it's 3 green snails and then, green snails and then a little bit of blue and then some more blue and then all blue, under punctuated equilibrium, what we just see is a very sudden shift from green snails to blue snails. So this is what a punctuated equilibrium fossil record would look like. And this is also, of course, what we do see in the fossil record. We often have different fossils that appear at first to be one form, they look one way, and then all of a sudden, the very next layer, they look a different way. So, what can explain that? Well, this would. Sometimes forces of drift. Drift is probably the best explanation for this because drift affects small populations dramatically. Underneath drift, natural selection may not be the most important force affecting these organisms. And that's just because it's random chance. If you only have 2 individuals in a population and one of them is going to pass on its genes, let's just assume that's going to happen, that's just a coin flip. Versus one individual that's different in a population of thousands, the chance of it passing on its genetic material is much lower. And definitely that next generation is not going to be entirely blue. It may be a little bit more blue. We could take this generation model right here, right? We had one blue individual that came out, and then maybe in the next generation we have a little bit more blue. And then maybe in the next generation the proportion is even more blue. And then in the next generation it's even more a little bit blue. That's the model of evolution we tend to think about. But this does occur. Both of these do occur in nature. And we can see both examples in the fossil record. And I really like covering this topic because I think some people get some misconceptions about punctuated equilibrium. They think that it somehow invalidates natural selection and those Darwinian ideas of evolution. But in reality, it doesn't. It just shows that evolution happened at a much faster period in time. If we want to think about real-world examples instead of these randomly drawn green and blue snails, we can look at the peppered moth, right? That classic example of a moth, which was a white coloration, right? So let's do this. I don't know why I'm drawing with the mouse. So we had a moth that was largely a white moth, but then what happened, let's change the color on this to a, will black show up on here? No, it will not. Let's just use the color purple to show it's a darker moth. So let's say that so we had these white moths, right? And if we were able to really see these moths in the fossil record, we may see at each layer, right, it would be white moths, white moths, white moths. But then what happened? What happened to these moths? Classic example. Factories, the Industrial Revolution, and with that, a ton of air pollution. So, woo, there we go, air pollution. Well, now, all these moths, they used to blend in beautifully with the trees. They used to be able to sit on the trees. They had a much lighter colored bark, so a moth could reasonably blend in to a lighter colored tree. But when the soot, I don't know if it's considered soot, when the pollution occurred, unfortunately what happens is that it ended up darkening the color of the trees just from the pollution itself. So now the trees are much darker. They actually are a more polluted color. So the moths, which originally blended in beautifully on these light colored trees, now they stick out, okay? They stick out really badly on these pollution-covered trees. So what happened? Natural selection happened. All of the birds that were flying around, they saw these white moths no longer camouflaged on the tree, and thus, the darker the color of the moths, the more closely those moths matched the polluted trees, they were able to blend in. So if we still have these trees, which are, covered in, I think it's soot or smog or whatever it is, they now were darker. So I can actually draw the moth on here, and you can see, or I guess you can't see, that it blends in much better. And this happened very, very quickly. This happened over the span of a few decades. So in the fossil record, we would see that all of a sudden we had the moth that looked like this, all of a sudden, boom, look like this. And that is directly from natural selection. So punctuated equilibrium doesn't discount natural selection, actually provides evidence for it. It's just showing that evolutionary change can happen rapidly or it can happen gradually. So there is the question is there a chance that cases of punctuated equilibrium are affected by fossil bias, making stochastic fossilization looked more like a pronounced pattern? The technical term is smoggy smog, that is true. So fossil bias, making stochastic, sorry, I'm gonna try and process the question so I'm answering it correctly. There is definitely fossil bias that occurs. So fossil bias at its core is when we only have fossils of hard-bodied organisms. This is why many species are really difficult to find. Soft-bodied as well as small organisms, right? Salamanders are very difficult to find in the fossil record because they are usually quite small and they have a softer body. And you compare that to a brontosaurus whose femur is going to be much larger than I am tall. That fossil is much more likely to be discovered. It's much more likely to be fossilized. So there is a fossil bias. And then I feel like I'm only half getting the question. Dang it. Try asking me in a different way, because I feel like I'm almost there. There is a fossil bias that can occur with punctuated equilibrium. I think I'm just getting stuck on stochastic fossilization. Stochastic being random. I feel like I don't know how to answer that question properly. But yeah, so punctuated equilibrium, it's a really cool process, and I do think it's taught wrong often, or it's not taught with the proper nuance that it does occur alongside gradual evolution. I mean, if we were looking at these moths, maybe there wasn't this selective pressure from the Industrial Revolution. Let's say we started the era of industry with solar panels and whatnot. The moths may have just occurred underneath a gradual process. Maybe the trees naturally darkened over many, many generations, over hundreds and thousands of years. Those moths would show that gradual progression as well if this pattern and color matching was so critical to their survival. So yeah, it's definitely a real thing. But I've seen it. I often go on the subreddit for evolution, and it's really, unfortunately, there's just a lot of wrong information on there. There's a lot of people who think evolution is just natural selection when it's really not. There's a lot more processes that occur. So yeah, and this is maybe a good jumping point for the selfish gene theory, because that's really getting into how organisms are either evolution is acting on the genes itself rather than on the organisms, and there's a lot of nuance there. So I'll start going into that, but yeah, if I didn't answer your fossil bias question properly, just let me know, because I totally understand. Yeah, we can always backtrack. But I'm going to start kind of breaking down the selfish gene idea. Oop, what am I doing? So the selfish gene, okay. What I mean is, could novel traits look like they arose really quickly, not because rapid evolution occurred, but because only individuals with that trait were preserved due to random chance? Oh, yeah, no, totally. So in that situation that you're describing, no, I think you answered it. I just got stuck in my head. I knew exactly what you meant. It just didn't click for me. So in that situation, it would be basically, yeah, let's go back to our snail example. Actually, let's use our fossil example record. So if we have a population of these snails, and let's say it was a gradual evolution. I actually really like this point. This is actually a really good point to bring up, and I think we should spend the time on it. So let's say we have our wonderful crosscut of the different layers of Earth. I'll try and make them large so I can actually draw on them effectively. Let's say what actually happened was a model of gradual evolution. So let's say it was these green snails. Boop. Green snails. Snails have eyes. And then it was maybe a few less green snails. And then maybe, even fewer. And then ultimately, let's change the color here. Ultimately, they became more and more gradual. But this is assuming that all of the individuals were fossilized properly. So there we go. So this would be like a gradual evolution, maybe not the best example. But let's say what happened was we didn't actually get that many fossilizations. We didn't actually have too crazy many. And maybe what actually occurred was during this time period right here, at this lowest level. Why did it delete all of them? At the lowest level, these green snails were not fossilized. They just weren't captured in the fossil record. Fossils are exceedingly rare. They are very difficult to find, much less date. So in this case, we may have the fossils that occurred at the older time period. But then, just because of, stochastic fossilization, a random chance, we just only had the blue snails that happened. In this case, it looks very, very much like punctuated equilibrium, but the real evolutionary history was gradual. And that is often used as an example for why punctuated equilibrium may not be a thing. And of course, it is very difficult to see this in a fossil record because we're talking about millions of years, but we know it exists from more modern examples, like the peppered moth, for example. So it's definitely a very real thing. It's absolutely real. But there are definitely biases, and anything with the fossil record is very difficult to parse through. A lot of paleontological papers, they are very, how do I put it, loose with the conclusions, and I think you kind of have to be, because there's just not much you can do. It's very difficult. You can't run an experimental trial on fossils for T-Rexes, right? You can only observe the patterns and then make conclusions about possibly what processes are occurring. So absolutely, this could just be from a bias in the fossil record. But you could even make the case though that the opposite could have happened, right? So if we had the exact same thing, maybe it was punctuated equilibrium, but instead of showing that it was 90% blue snails and 10% green snails, maybe it was 50-50 were fossilized. So now we're looking at, it looks like it's faster, it looks like it's gradual, but in reality it was a very fast process. And we could look at the fossil record, but we could also just do random sampling. If you have a very small sample size, it is more likely that you are you're getting to wrong conclusions. So if we had looked at the peppered moth and we had said that they were doing things gradually, according to whatever time scale we're looking at, but we were sampling moths and we see, oh, this one is white, this one is purple, this one's white, this one's purple, and we just ended up with, let's say it was like this, right? So I think I'm not explaining myself super well. So let's say that the reality was, I'll just use circles for this. So we'll do green and blue. So let's say the reality was something along these lines, where it was an actual punctuated equilibrium type of model. Let's add just one more green there. So this was something that each generation, right, they're shifting from green to blue until they're entirely blue. But because of whatever our sampling method was, however we decided to actually test this information, we only picked out 3 individuals at a time, right? This is a great example for punctuated. Of course, it's not instant. Of course, not every single individual is going to change. But we then selected 3 individuals, okay? And we selected these 3 individuals. And then by random happenstance, we selected these 3 individuals. And then by further random happenstance, we selected these 3 individuals, and then these 3 individuals. What we'd actually be looking at is a model that looks more like gradual evolution, when in reality it's not. So if we extracted these out, it would look like this, which looks more far more gradual than the reality of the situation. So sampling bias is absolutely a real thing in these models, but it's also like fossil bias. So it's like the bias can go either way, I guess, is what we're really getting at here. And of course, you know, I guess the caveat with this always is that whenever we're looking at saying that evolution happened fast or evolution happened slow, we need to really, really focus on what do we mean by fast or slow? What are we contextualizing this within? A bacteria that has a generation time of a few hours has a very different time scale that it operates on than, say, an elephant that lives 70 years and the generations are every 20 to 30. So that's something that I think a lot of people, I mean everyone misses intuitively, is that evolution, we often think about it in terms of our time scale, in terms of our generations. Every 20, 30-ish years is a new generation of humans, but there are organisms who within our generation have dozens or hundreds or even thousands of generations within the same time scale. And that's something I'm always going to harp on with evolutionary stuff in general. It's sort of this not anthropomorphic, but it's an anthropic bias. We are only used to our perception of reality, so it is extraordinarily difficult for us to get in the mind of a bacteria, right? Or to get into the evolutionary mind. I'm anthropomorphizing evolution a bit too much. But I think this is a good opportunity to jump over to that gene-based evolution model. So again, this is everything punctuated equilibrium. We can always go back to it at the end of this. But I want to focus on genes and what those actually mean. So when I was in undergrad, I was taking my biology, I think this was 101, it might have been 102, doesn't really matter, but one of our extra credit assignments was to read the selfish gene. This is a really foundational book from Dawkins, and I do think that everyone should read it, even if you don't necessarily agree with Dawkins. There is some controversy, I guess, with it. And academic controversies are more of a heated discussion than a real controversy. Most of the time, both sides are right in some capacity. They just are, there's often either a miscommunication or a misunderstanding or a it's someone looking at one system and saying that it applies here, while another person looks at a different system and say that it applies there, when in reality they both work. It's just that they're in different systems, right? So the core of the selfish gene is that evolution operates on the gene. And so what do we mean by that? Often, we assume that evolution operates on the organisms, right? We don't often say that the gene has evolved to look like, if we're looking at those snails example, right? We have those green and blue snails, that might just be our examples for everything. A gene model wouldn't say that this snail is evolving or has evolved to be blue. Rather, they're saying that the genes that are contained within the snail, so all of the genes, let's see how quickly I can draw a double helix, there we go, are what is being selected for. It's not saying that the organism is being selected, it's saying that the genes are being selected for. This is a great simplification. I definitely want to cover selfish gene and the other theories a little bit more in depth in a video. But what we're saying is that evolution at its most fundamental level is acting on genes. And of course, This is at some level true. Whenever we're looking at population genetics, which is studying evolution at a much smaller time scale than phylogenetics, we are often looking at the fluctuations of alleles in a population. We may say that in this example here, right? Let's just do F1, F2, F3. It may be that the proportion of the genes in the F1 population, okay, it's not just one individual, it's the entire population. Maybe the proportion of the blue genes is, let's do, I think I can explain this better if I reset up the equation. Let's do this a little bit better. So I'm gonna make a table. I'm gonna make a table. Underneath a gene model of evolution that really focuses on understanding how, well, yeah, like genes evolve. I don't know another way to say that. We would say that in each generation, boo, 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 boo. Here we go. So we'll just say F1, F2, F3, and F4. Let's say that this gene that is, or this allele that is going to change snails from green to blue is represented by a big B. Okay, we have a big B to convert, actually I should put this down here. So this is the allele that if a snail has it, they are all of a sudden blue. Okay, that's just, we're going with really simple inheritance here. So this is the generation. This is the allele frequency. So what we mean by that, frequency, is that if we have a value of, let's say, 0.1, that means that within the entire population, 10% of the organisms are blue. 10% have the big B allele, the big blue B allele. Underneath the gene model of evolution, we'd be looking at how that allelic frequency changes over time. So maybe at another time step, it is going to be 0.2, and then maybe 0.3, and then maybe it jumps up and it's 0.8. And of course, what the proponents of gene theory are really focusing on is that it is all of the genes are affected by these evolutionary processes, and that they are all going to be underneath evolutionary pressure. But the counterclaims to this is that yes, even though allelic frequencies are the fundamental forces of evolution, that is what evolution is acting upon, right? When we measure evolution, we often measure it by the alleles in the population. We say that there are more of this, that there is a selection that is favoring this allele. In this case, as we can see, each generation, the frequency of this B allele is increasing. We have 10% of the population, and then 20%, and then 30%, and then 80% of the population. So in this case, we would be saying that evolution is, trying not to say that evolution is a force that is deterministic. Evolution is acting upon that B allele, and it is selecting for the B allele. And we would say that because it is increasing, the relative proportion of it is increasing in the population. So I'm hoping that clicks, because I'm going to say now the issue with it, and this is often a debate that was between Dawkins and Stephen Gould, who they're both amazing evolutionary biologists. They both have had tremendous impacts on the field, but they do disagree on this force, where Dawkins is saying that evolution is largely acting on the genes. I really need to reread Selfish Gene. It was such a good book. It's been a couple of years. While Gould, though, is saying that evolution is actually acting upon the phenotype. Evolution is acting upon the organism and the individual, not just the genes. And this makes sense too, because if we go back to this example, right, we have this generation here. It doesn't matter necessarily what the genetics are within this snail. So it's saying that within this snail, are numerous genes. Okay, we have, yeah, the big B gene that we're talking about here, but we also have, you know, maybe something we represent with an A and then a C, and then we have, you know, numerous genes within every single organism. It doesn't necessarily matter because it is the combination of these genes that results in an organism looking a certain way, behaving a certain way, having certain physical properties, and that is ultimately what evolution is acting upon. It is acting upon the sum total of all of the genes. So it's slightly incorrect to say that evolution is just acting upon each gene individually. I will say that Dawkins has had multiple updates with different books, as well as some other people who have sort of carried his torch, and have said that it's not acting upon the singular genes, it is actually acting upon all genes, but evolution is acting upon the genes themselves, not necessarily the organism, right? And it's a very nuanced discussion that I think a lot of people get kind of tripped up on. Personally, where I am, you know, this is just my opinion, kind of like which camp I fall into. I think that the gene theory is actually a little bit more robust in a way. I believe that, yeah, evolution is acting upon the genes, but it is acting upon the sum total of the genes. It's a nuance that is very difficult to tease apart, so that's why I want to do a very deep dive video on it, because the counterclaims, again, I kind of started this saying that a lot of times in scientific controversies, there's not one person is right and one person is wrong. Rather, both sides are having a lot of correct information, and where they are debating is in the gray area. I believe that Dawkins had an updated book where he also said, yeah, it's not individual genes, it's, you know, the sum total of the genes, but it is still acting upon the genes, not upon the individual. So if we're looking at this example here, I'll just redraw this really quick, where the gene theory is saying that it is being affected by, is it affected by, so again, these are all different alleles, these are different gene variants, these are different ways, different evolutionary stepping stones, yeah. Selfish gene theory, selfish genes or gene theory, let me see, is acting upon these genes right here, these alleles. They are acting upon the sum total of the alleles, while the counterclaims from Gould, for example, say that evolution is actually acting upon the phenotype of the organism. So this is, I'll just put it as, I'll put it as Gouldian evolution. We'll just go for that. I think there's a different term, but. So even though that these genes are contained within the organism, Dawkins is just saying that, Dawkins is saying that that evolution occurs at the gene level, while the Gouldian view of evolution is that it occurs at the organism level. I think both are very accurate, you know. At some level, even if you have all these genes that maybe make you slightly less able to respire, you have a lower respiration rate, and that's how your genes are expressing themselves. If you are eaten because your color is blue, then it doesn't really matter that your genes are working on other processes. What matters is how you are operating in that environment at that time, and how that actually enables you to pass on genetic information to the next generation. I think this is like a kind of more of a semantical debate. It's not really a huge debate that is saying that, oh, they're both wrong. I think it's just saying, what should you really focus on when you're looking at evolution? I think it's more of a debate on how we should be viewing evolution, and I agree that looking at the organism is slightly damaging, because in reality, evolution acts upon entire populations of organisms. It's not just one. What we mean by that, by evolution acts on populations, is if we have a, we're just going to use these snails. They're super easy to draw. If we have some population of snails, right? So we'll just draw a couple here, Boom, 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 boom. Here we go. And let's say we'll just make them a good mix of green and blue. Okay. And I promise this example will go somewhere. So these all have different genetics. They all vary dramatically. What a Gouldian view may look at is that evolution is acting upon, I don't know, let's say we have some bird that just loves blue snails. It just, like, loves to eat blue snails. So what happens is in the next generation, after being eaten, this bird eats this blue snail. So now there are less blue snails in the population to pass on their genes. The Gouldian view will just say that, well, it has acted upon that organism, that individual, so that in the next generation there's less of them in the population to pass on. The genetic view is instead going to say, well, now there are less of that gene in the total population pool, right? So there's less blue genes in that population pool to be passed on. It's a very semantical debate, and there's a lot more nuances that I don't think I'm explaining very well here. But I think it's important to really look at both, and I think both of them are important to factor into your viewpoint of evolution. Is that yes, evolution does act upon populations and individuals, but at its fundamental level, whatever evolutionary force is affecting individuals and affecting populations in that time will invariably affect the frequencies of alleles in that population. So maybe a more a synthesis of both of those ideas. And I think that's how most people view evolution nowadays. I often find in evolutionary debates, maybe this is just like actually academic debates in general, we see these debates and it just seems like they've already been resolved for 20, 30 years, but they're still being taught to students. I prefer just to say that evolution acts upon the organism, it acts upon the phenotype, how the organism operates, how it looks inside of an environment, but that ultimately will affect the frequencies of genes in a population. So yeah. And so yeah, if there's any questions at all, I should probably say this a little more. If there's any questions about anything related to biology or what we're talking about, or you just want to know something, just this is live. We can have a conversation. But what I want to do now, because I've been standing for an hour straight yelling into a mic, one thing that a few people really wanted to know about, if you hear something, I'm just lowering my desk. It's a standing desk because I need to sit. My knees are giving out. Gotta love hypermobility stuff. I really want to talk about some of the career aspects about being in biology and doing biology as a career, because this time of year, a lot of folks are really thinking about it, and let's go to a more personal view. Maine, hello. A lot of folks are starting to think about their next career steps, or they're at the end of a degree, or they are, maybe they're entering a degree and they want to know how to maximize their time for biology. So let me just start with saying my personal story about how I got into biology and how I'm here today. So I realized just the other day that I've been doing professional biology it'll be 10 years coming this spring. My first major biologist experience was in undergrad. I grew up in a pet store, so I was used to working with animals, and when I first entered college, I was like, I'm gonna be a zookeeper. I think that's what I wanna do, blah, 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 blah. But then I fell in love with the research process, just through random happenstance, getting into the right lab, being with the right person. So I had a very weird research experience as an undergraduate. I was raising lizards. Illegally is a little strongly worded. The person I was doing biology first under refused to get approval from the university. He was he was a mess. He was a mess. I credit him for getting me into biology and showing me research, especially field research, but there is a reason he was fired. There are multiple reasons he was fired by my junior year, and I had a hand in that. So anyways, I got into it, and that sparked my love. I started pursuing undergraduate research. I got into a lab with Dr. Lee Fitzgerald out at Texas A&M. And I was doing a lot of research for the, oh God, they changed their name. They used to be the Biodiversity Research and Teaching Collection. It's a museum that houses specimens of organisms and conducts field research. So I worked there for a bit, and I did a few projects. We were like doing acoustic monitoring of Houston toads and, just assisting wherever. And eventually I started doing my own research. I got into an undergraduate research project. I can actually show you it really quick because we did get it published. So Edith L. Moore. So while I was an undergrad, I got to do a research project at this one right here. We got it published in 2021 because the research process is rather slow. But it is a herpetological survey of Edith L. Moore Nature Sanctuary. This is out in Houston. Basically, we just surveyed an area, and here we go. We can view the full text because it's open access. But essentially, I just ran surveys throughout the area, looking for reptiles and amphibians and documenting them. So this was my first real big research project. And it really did teach me a lot. I learned a lot about how to set up a project, how to work with people, how to really dive into things and learn about the world. So I was able to do this project with some funding through a Applied Biodiversity Research Scholars Program, Conservation Scholars. It has a very long name, and it's been a very long time. But that led me to do an internship. They funded me to do an internship because I definitely did not have the money to fund myself. And that's when I ended up going to Belize, and that has started all of my more recent research. So Belize has been where I've been doing research now since, God, what was my first year there? My first year there would have been 2018, I believe, 2018. So about 6 years now. And I did that. I went back to Belize. I lived there for 6 months. I ran some field programs. I helped some students learn. I was doing the intern coordination stuff. And then I went to grad school. So I've followed a very traditional academia path, which is go to school, do undergraduate research, go to grad school, publish a thesis, and right now that's where I'm at. So I just finished my master's 6 months ago. Been taking a little bit of time off to recalibrate. I was building trails out in Tennessee for a little bit, and now I live in North Carolina, so, hey. But yeah, that's a very traditional academic path. I chose to do a master's instead of a PhD per the recommendation of several professors who just said, PhD students often aren't sure if they actually want to be a researcher, and I can attest to the fact that during the course of my master's, a lot of PhD students dropped. They realized that it wasn't what they really wanted to do, and that's totally fine. I think there's a lot of focus on how, completing a PhD, and it's a huge achievement, but people don't see how often people drop out from those programs. My incoming class for the evolution department was 4, and only 2 of us have graduated. And I will say one of them, I love him so much. I love him, and I'm not trying to talk bad about him in any way. He realized this wasn't it. He realized this ain't it for him, and he just decided to drop. He's like, I'm just gonna publish some BS thesis. I'm just gonna do my presentation. Doesn't matter if it's great or not. And honestly, I wish I did that way earlier too. Instead, I floundered for years and then ultimately did the exact same thing he did. So, whatever. But it's difficult. It's super, super, super difficult. And yeah, so I think actually that's a perfect question. So now that I'm done with my master's, do I plan to continue any of my studies or start new research projects? So for, I guess, added context, throughout my master's, I did my master's on a very technical, evolution-heavy thesis. It's about phylogenetic regionalization. It taught me evolution. I have hardcore field background. I wanted to learn theory and coding and all that stuff. I do plan on continuing some of that work. I just need to figure out a way to fund it more. That's really the big thing. So I told myself I'm not going to think about it for 6 months. And then now that I'm here, what I plan on doing is reaching out to the IUCN because they were interested in some of my work, and I think we can maybe get some funding to continue it. But the whole time I was doing my master's, I was still doing other research projects. Like we published this paper actually during my master's. We had written it up for an undergraduate research scholars program, and so I already had like the publication, I had this all put together, but then the embargo on it ran out, so we were like, let's publish it, and so I published this. But I've also been doing active research in Belize the whole time, not at all related to my master's. And that's when we, for example, here we go. Let me do Dylan Jones, Ninia Diademata. So we published this paper. I don't know where this picture came from, actually. Where did this picture? I didn't upload this picture. Hold up. Sorry, I'm just getting distracted. I didn't upload that picture. I wonder where that... Because that's not even the right snake. What is going on? I need to reach out to someone. I know who I need to reach out to. But anyway, so this paper, this was from some field surveys. I published this year. Was that this year? That was this year. Oh, hey, look at that. But this was just like a simple note on this snake that we found that had, it faked its own death, and then it also had this beautiful, beautiful iridescence underneath. So, anywho doodles. We were doing this research, and we were also starting up this project on bats. So I've been doing this analysis for like 2 years now on if bats' capturability is influenced by the moon cycles. And we've had like numerous issues with it. So, I'm just like gushing about my research. That's the problem. You start talking about your research and it's harder to stop. But yeah, so I do plan on continuing those studies. We're actually trying to plan out another field expedition to Belize in this summer. So I've been kind of planning that, and now that I have more time, because I'm not splitting it with the master's, we're planning on setting up some projects, or I want to set up some projects. I'm almost certain I'm able to do so with the station. We have I feel confident we can. But the way I'm doing it is I'm going more the route of the independent biologist. Academia is just not for me. There's a lot of issues that I personally have with academia from a more like moral ethical standpoint, and just also seeing the long-term trends. Academia in the United States, unless you're at a really well-funded university or have really good support systems, or it's just difficult. I personally realized that I didn't want to spend another 6, 7 years, 10 years probably doing a PhD and then a postdoc, and then maybe being an assistant professor, and then still being in debt this whole time. And I just realized it's not for me. Making making scraps. So ultimately what I'm doing now is this. This right here is my job. This is how I want to make my money, and I have been able to make money doing this. So essentially it's teaching and building courses and doing social media to provide an income so that I can do biology. My path now is a little bit more non-traditional. Biology is in a weird state right now. So what a lot of people do is, so academia is one path. If you're able to do it and you really want to do it, do it. It is difficult. I think that it is not well advertised until you're in it, how difficult it can be financially, mentally, et cetera, et cetera. And unfortunately, I just see a lot of professors, and this is no hate on any individual professors. I do see a lot of professors who don't do active research anymore. They're essentially administrative teachers. They just run the classrooms and they run the labs, but they don't actually do their own research anymore. And that's not really like a dig. It's just, they did the hours, they did the work, they did it for 20, 30 years, and now they just want to collect a paycheck and do admin. Not really hateful way. That's just the reality for a lot of people, and I get it. The other routes are to work for the government. So Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, that type of stuff. Personally, that's not my thing. I do have issues with the government in general. I just don't like it. Also, pretty much the whole time I've been doing my conservation career, all I have seen are hiring freezes and lots of, there's no jobs or there's not that much pay. And it's like once you get in, you're more likely to have stuff, but it's just not my thing. So where I see myself personally doing conservation research and doing conservation biology is making my money through social media, through courses, through running eco trips, through private contracts, and eventually starting my own nonprofit so I can get contracts, et cetera, et cetera. And that's sort of how I want to do research. I believe in working with nonprofits. I believe in working with multiple groups in order to actually achieve a goal. And all this funds my research. So planning on going down to Belize for a couple months, and while we're there, we'll set up some new projects. Hopefully we'll get some funding. And this isn't a new model. Some people have already been doing this for a while. I'm just another person in the long line of them. So I just think that this is something that fits with me personally way better. I'm not trying to dig on anyone who does a different path than me. We all have our own different paths. It's just that this is what works for me. I have mental stuff and body stuff that makes it a little bit difficult for me to hold down 9-to-5 jobs, if I'm being very, very honest. So for me, going into business for myself, just like my entire family has, we're a small business family, that's what I want to do. And I want to do it to support biology. So for the last 5-6 years, I have been really, really focused on how can I make this a reality? How can I create income so that I can do and fund my own biology research and also other people's biology research, right? I want to be able to lead expedition trips down to Belize, and we actually do a project, and I have the connections to do it. And right now, I'm just focused on making the income and making money to do that sustainably. But in terms of biology, conservation career advice, yeah, there's a million and one paths, and I think it really does depend on what you want to do, who you are as a person. But also, I think that this idea, I really do firmly believe that the academia to field biologist pipeline is nearing at the end. I'm speaking from a place maybe with a little bit of hubris, but it's really, really, really difficult to go to school for 8 to 10 years, I know I'm preaching to the choir a little bit here, but I think it's really, really difficult to warrant going to 4 years for a bachelor's degree and then going for a master's degree, which is 2 years at best, but mine took 5. Partially because I was in San Diego where it's really expensive and I couldn't afford to graduate for 2 years, but also COVID hit, life happens, dude, and that's what happens for a lot of people. And to do all of that, to push, to get into this debt, overwork yourself, only to exit and have no jobs, it's not even like I'm applying, it's just, there just aren't any. And they pay minimum wage. I mean, it's really difficult to justify that personally. Yeah, I'm a biologist, I do this, I make money from here and this and that, but I make a lot of my money training AI models, right? Because I'm a biology expert on there, and if I can help, I mean, AI is going to happen. It is happening. It's a thing. I know there's issues with it, and I'm fully aware of it. But if I can at least help the accuracy issue of AI, that's my contribution to the world, and it pays me $45 an hour. So it's like really, really hard to justify that when I'm like, I could work on that for 2 days, make my money, and then spend the rest of my week looking for stuff and running projects. So to kind of, I guess, peel back the curtain a bit, my next step is to get land, start running field ecology courses and more self-paced courses, and then also run research on that land. So it's the field school station model. Scientific bodies outside of academia and the government both have their issues, and I just kind of realized I really liked working with nonprofits. Ultimately, I love working with nonprofits. So I got into the AI training through Outlier. I got it through, oh God, what was the pipeline for me to get there? I was on, oh my God, what is that app? There's a Freelancer. No, not Freelancer. There's a lot of freelancing websites that you can just sign up for, and they have looking for a biology expert, looking for a stats expert, blah, 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 blah. And sometimes it was just, I did some stats for some medical student, you know, just a simple t-test, and they paid me. But then one of them reached out. It was an AI training gig, and it was through Remo tasks. And then now I'm on Outlier. Outlier I like a lot. Um, yeah, check out. Um, I don't think. Yeah, hold on. You might. Now, the issue is. Here we go. I can just pop it in the chat. Yeah, so outlier.ai. It is actually pretty chill. You know, I'm not like trying to promote AI stuff too crazy much, but essentially all I do is I log in, they give me a task, they say like, here's a prompt, and it shows me 2 AI like responses, and then I just validate them for accuracy. They actually takes me about an hour per task, but they pay hourly and there's bonuses, so it definitely helps for side income, but also it's not consistent. That is the biggest thing. It is not consistent. I had nothing for 3 months. So don't rely on it as your sole source of income. Um, but yeah, the outlier.ai is probably like one of the better ones out there. Um, it's pretty good, but a lot of times if they don't recruit you, you might only get, it's like 20 bucks an hour, but it's remote. So, and you can do it anytime, you know. Um, and yeah. So that's I mean yeah, shit, we're in the same boat. Also trying to grow the YouTube channel. I'm actually like super close to being monetized. I'm like 500 watch hours away. Got everything else. Just need to get those watch hours up. But you know, I took a major break from social media. Major break from social media when I finished the masters. Stopped posting a whole lot. Just really focused on like existing for a little bit and decompressing and whatnot. So that was a big change, huge change for me. But now I'm in like, you know, let's grow this, let's make this a thing, let's get the newsletter going, let's get this. Yeah, I mean, likewise, man. Like, I mean, we've been, gosh, we've been following each other for a long time. It's cool, right? But like, yeah, it's a lot of work. YouTube is like not for the weak, man. It's hard work. People don't understand how difficult it can be to do YouTube. Really, the consistency and the regularity is difficult. Lately, I've been like, I think I'm starting to find my groove though. I think I'm really starting to figure out what it works. Yeah, I think even before that, I feel like we were following when I was still an undergrad. I feel like that, which would have been like 2018. Um, at least on Instagram for sure. I don't know. I also am like, what happened? Like, I feel like I lost like 3 years of my life. So I guess everyone feels like that. Yeah. Um, YouTube performance is like pretty crazy. It's difficult because like when I started on YouTube, I was posting field work stuff, like just trying to do it. I have 200 gigabytes of field survey footage from Belize in 2019 that I just haven't been able to do it. You joined in 2020. Wow, it feels like it's been longer, but I guess that's not what time does, right? Um, yeah, and Instagram. Oh man, you joined at like realistically, you joined at a really bad time for Instagram. It was awesome, like 2014 to 2020, I think. Um, yeah. It's really weird. Like it's being a biologist Instagrammer thing. It was super weird because I blew up a long time ago, and then like now I've literally been at 31.9K followers or whatever for like a year or something stupid. It's just like it's been at the point nine. It's just like it's just so hard to grow on there nowadays, unless you're just going viral all the time. But I don't really care about going viral anymore. I learned that like most people who follow you end up leaving the moment you stop posting, and it's just like not my bag. Plus, also the monetization is pretty awful. Threads is pretty good. I like Threads a lot though. Um, yeah, so it's which sucks because like the Instagram biology community is awesome. Definitely, it is an amazing community of people. Um, but I feel like it's a little difficult to educate in the way. Yeah, I mean like, but it's stagnant even if you don't put effort into it, but like it's also stagnates if you do put effort into it. That's the problem. I mean like I've posted like I whenever I'm like on top of it, I'm making 10 posts a week easy and they're, good quality and they have all the stuff and blah 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 blah. But it's just impossible to really figure it out. And then, you look at YouTube and they want you to succeed. They're like, "Hey, if you really succeed, you're gonna make money for both of us. Let's make this work." The analytics are amazing. It's like, hey, you're doing great. Keep doing these videos. Keep doing that. So yeah, it sucks because Instagram is where I put all my focus on for years, and that's just where I liked it. I like that it's multimedia. I like that you can do a lot of different things, but ultimately, I'm busting butt and not really making anything from it. Not really making that much money. It got me like name recognition, which is nice, but I think that I just think there's better ways to. Yeah, I don't know. It's like that realization of if I want to do these things, I need to make money. Um, I can't be doing it as a side hobby and trying to make a career. So I'm like, let's make it my career. Definitely don't want to give up on Instagram. I have a feeling it might get better in the next few years. I think Meta is going to realize that they're kind of killing it. Hopefully, they realize they're killing it. Uh, and then, but I don't know. I mean, we'll see if TikTok gets banned, right? I think that'll make a big difference, which is why I'm kind of posting a lot more right now to like retrain the algorithm for when everyone migrates over, because I think a lot of people are going to switch over from TikTok and realize it's a very, very different one. Um, Shoot me the link. I've been on Discord servers a few times and I've struggled. Is that the one with oh my god, what's his name? Tech. I think his username is Tech Noendo. Tech. Well, I forget his username. He's a really technical dude. He's really into like the like I don't know. He was following me when I first started on YouTube, and he offered amazing advice, and we talked a lot through Discord. I just struggle to be on Discord. Like that's really where I struggle. But I do want a community again, so I'd be very down to restart it. It's just one more app. Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah, no, I'm very down. Because it could just be that like I never got into Discord because I was too overwhelmed with grad school and everything else. Um, so yeah, shoot it to me wherever. Very down. But yeah, nah. Tech is pretty awesome. Like it's kind of cool at this stage where it's like a lot of not giant, million subscriber accounts and stuff. I think the wildlife, I hate to call ourselves influencers, but we technically are or whatever. The wildlife influencer community is actually pretty freaking cool. Like so many cool people. I I would actually prefer a small server. I've been on some large ones and I just can't keep up. Like going in and you see like thousands of messages and I'm like, not my thing. But yeah, because I've been like digging in deep lately. I've been focusing more on like education, news, that type of stuff. Um, the wildlife side is going to come out a lot more though. I just like know what I have a path and I have a plan. Um, so yeah, like I was actually supposed to record a couple videos yesterday, but then my website was having all these issues that I just couldn't solve. So it just derailed me really badly. And I've been working on I started my work week on Sunday. So this is like this I consider this as my final thing for the week. I'm like logging off. Well, best of my ability after this. Because yeah, it's been a long week. I'm proud of myself though. Like it's like now that I'm like fully dependent on myself, it's like I gotta make my own schedule. I gotta really push. But in the month or so that I've been full-time content creation, full-time education, produced a few videos, made a few new courses. Oh, I was supposed to shout out my course. I don't give a shit. But yeah, it's difficult. I don't know if you're like full-time content creation or if you're in the same boat of like half having your foot in. Um, but it's difficult. I I was talking to my girlfriend Hannah about this, And it's like my bar for success is so low because I've been a student for so long. The most I've ever made in a year was like 15K. So it's like, it's so bad. But you know, it's, you live and you learn. Um, oh, okay. I'm just not realizing the analytics on my stream didn't look great. But yeah, it's definitely a thing. Who is there anyone else in that Discord server I would know off the top of my head? Like I'm trying to think because I mean, depends on if it's like mainly herping YouTubers or, yeah. I used to want to just do the herping YouTubing, but then I was like, I didn't, I don't know. I was like thinking about it and it wasn't, I guess I see YouTube as a means to an end and I want to be creative, but it's like I need to be financially supported to be creative. So, you know, like that's what I focus on. So that's why I'm like ad revenue, selling courses, blah, 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 blah. And I don't know, I like entrepreneurial stuff. It's fun. So let's see. Oh gosh. Oh. But yeah, I mean, at this point in the stream, we're just hanging out. And that's, I used to do like so much live streaming, like when I was doing stuff with mammals, right? You know, it's, I don't know what happened with them, if I'm being honest. Like, I mean, you remember when I was doing that, like the Naturalist Showdown live streams and all that? They were like really cool. It was like, hey, we're doing like outdoor wildlife live streaming. And then it just like, it was like in the matter of like 3 or 4 months, it just switched into this like crypto NFT rug pull thing, which like I'm glad we didn't launch. But it was just like, I was like, what's going on? But none of us liked it, and it just, I don't know what happened. That was just like a weird like COVID time, and I don't know. It was like they're funding me. I'm not gonna complain too much about the money, but I think they lost sight badly, badly lost sight, unfortunately. So good people, good intentions, but I think they just kind of fell into the crypto NFT hype and lost. I don't know. It was really unfortunate because that's not how it started and that's not originally what I signed on for. But, you know. Oh, Wild Report. Yeah. Yeah, send me a link, you know, wherever. You got all my socials and stuff. But yeah, it's like such a weird time to be a creator too, in some capacity. So it's although I do wish that like YouTube live streaming, I think there's so much potential here, but they really need to get better. There is, I don't know, when you compare to like Twitch and sorry, I just saw something come in that I need to look at really quick. Yeah, for sure, man. I'm probably gonna like clock out of here too as well. But yeah, it's crazy. So, you know, this is a great stopping point. I'm already seeing like some emails I gotta go into. But yeah, man. Yeah, it can be scuffed. I just want like more audience interactions. But yeah. You know what? Take care on this stream. I don't know if I'll do anything with this, but hey, this was a really good stream. I'm gonna do these every week too, by the way. Every Friday, I'm gonna try and really push to make it a thing. So, take care, and I need to figure out end stream. Doodles.